The question no one wants to answer at the center of this entire story is a question so direct, so uncomfortable that most people instinctively avoid it the moment it's asked. Do you believe Tyler Robinson murdered your husband? The answer, at least from those closest to the case, has never been simple. Some say yes. Others say the evidence doesn't support that conclusion at all. And then there are those who believe the truth is far darker, buried beneath layers of misdirection, fabricated narratives, and carefully managed silence. What makes this case uniquely disturbing is not just the crime itself, but how aggressively certain facts appear to have been obscured. People aren't struggling to believe reality because the theory is outrageous. They're struggling because the official version collapses under even minimal scrutiny. Those who have reviewed the materials say the same thing. Once you look at the autopsy report, once you examine the phone records, once you reconstruct the timeline, the story presented to the public no longer holds together. One of the earliest cracks appeared around a supposed phone call involving a alleged quote describing the victim's body as miraculously stopping a bullet. That quote was widely circulated, repeated by political figures, and treated as fact. But when investigators traced it back, something alarming emerged. The surgeon never said it. According to multiple sources familiar with the call, the statement did not originate from any medical professional at all. The voice delivering that quote on the phone was allegedly Erika herself. Yet when confronted, Erika claimed that both Andrew, the spokesperson, and the surgeon had gone rogue, accusing the doctor of violating HIPAA laws by speaking publicly. But sources close to the surgeon directly contradict this claim, insisting that no HIPAA violation occurred, no quote was authorized, and no miracle story was ever shared. The implication is chilling. The narrative was manufactured, and that's only the beginning. A familiar face in the wrong place, another. Detail that continues to haunt witnesses involves a photograph and older image of Erika with her hair tied back in a ponytail. For one eyewitness, that image triggered instant recognition. He says the woman in that photo is the same person he saw inside the lobby of Fort Wuka the night before everything changed. This wasn't a vague resemblance. According to him, the match was between 95 and 99% certain. The eyes, he said, were unmistakable, rare, unforgettable. He recalls her standing there, not alone, but with a man, someone who would later be identified as a key figure present at a highly restricted TIV meeting on the base. A meeting that, according to official narratives, Erika was never supposed to attend. That testimony alone would be enough to demand serious answers. Instead, it was met with silence. When Candace Owens entered the picture, things escalated dramatically. After Candace Owens publicly released new information related to what she described as a broader effort to shield the real shooter in Charlie's death, the reaction was immediate and extreme. According to Candace, Erika's behavior shifted from guarded to erratic. Public statements became defensive. Private conversations turned hostile. At one point, Candace openly suggested that Erika needed professional help, claiming her behavior no longer resembled that of a grieving human being. In fact, Candace went further, expressing a belief that the people involved didn't even seem human anymore, like sentinels masquerading as people, mimicking emotion without understanding it. That comment may sound dramatic, but it reflects how surreal the situation has become. Because from Candace's perspective, meeting Erika in person proved pointless. Every question was deflected, every concern reframed as an attack, every contradiction ignored, the alleged alibi that raised more questions. Though, situation exploded when Candace accused TPUSA spokesperson Andrew Colvett of working directly with Erika to construct a false alibi specifically covering Erika's whereabouts during a secret military meeting that took place one day before Charlie was assassinated. An eyewitness had already placed Erika at a hotel near Fort Wuka. In response, Andrew shared a photograph allegedly sent by Erika, claiming it proved she was home with her children at the time. But instead of clearing her name, the image did the opposite. Experts began questioning the metadata. Others questioned the timing. And many questioned why this evidence was being funneled through a random YouTuber instead of directly to Candace or to investigators. The more people examined the photo, the more problems emerged. The date that changed everything, Candace publicly pointed out a critical flaw. The photo and metadata Andrew provided didn't even correspond to the date. In question, the allegation placed Erika at Fort Wuka on September 8th. The so-called alibi, dated September 9th. That discrepancy wasn't minor, it was catastrophic. Because the entire controversy hinged on that single date. Candace accused Andrew of intentional disinformation, stating clearly that he understood the allegation but chose to respond with irrelevant evidence anyway. To many observers, this didn't look like confusion. It looked like a calculated attempt to derail the narrative. Why provide an alibi no one asked for? Why avoid the actual date? Why redirect instead of clarify? And most importantly, why was everyone suddenly so evasive whenever Fort Wuka was mentioned? A pattern begins to emerge as messages between Andrew and the YouTuber were read aloud in real time. Listeners noticed something unsettling. Andrew wasn't merely responding. He was guiding the conversation, carefully walking through Erika's supposed activities on the wrong day, while pretending she had no familiarity with Fort Wuka at all. That claim, critics say, is absurd. Erika's mother reportedly holds contracts with the Department of Defense. Fort Wuka sits practically in her backyard, and it exists squarely within the operational orbit of Turning Point. USA. The idea that Erika wouldn't recognize the name or understand its significant strained credibility beyond the breaking point. And then came the detail that made everything worse. The hand holding the phone in the alibi photo was unmistakably Erika's, which means this wasn't Andrew freelancing. It was direction. The CEO instructing the spokesperson. The alibi authored at the top. And suddenly, what once looked like chaos started to resemble coordination. Fort Wuka and the alibi. That made things worse once the Fort Wuka allegation entered the public conversation. Everything changed. What had previously felt like a messy, emotionally charged dispute suddenly took on the shape of something far more serious, something institutional, coordinated, and deeply uncomfortable. At the center of this escalation was a man named Mitch Snow. Snow is not a random online commentator. He is a retired U.S. Army staff member, someone familiar with military protocol, secure facilities, and the kind of people who are allowed near them. When he appeared on Candace Owens' podcast, he didn't hedge his words or soften his claims. He spoke plainly and precisely. He said that in early September 2025, just days before Charlie was assassinated, he was present at Fort Wuka in Arizona. While there, he noticed several individuals connected to Turning Point USA. That alone was notable. But what stopped him cold was recognizing a woman he believed almost with certainty was Erika Kirk. Snow explained that he did not come to this conclusion lightly. He recalled seeing a photo of Erika from her past, one where her hair was pulled back in a ponytail. That image immediately matched the woman he remembered seeing in the lobby of Fort Wuka the night before the meeting. He emphasized the eyes. They're rare, said. That's 95 to 99% certainty. I can't imagine it being anyone else. He added that she was not alone. She was standing with a man, someone who would later be identified as the president at that meeting. That detail matters because it places Erika not just near the base, but potentially adjacent to high-level discussions happening behind closed doors. Closed doors.
These were not casual allegations. They were specific, time-bound, and delivered by someone with no apparent incentive to fabricate them. And yet, Erika never addressed them. silence as strategy. Rather than responding directly to Snow's claims, Erika appeared to retreat behind institutional buffers. There was no public denial from her, no clarification, no attempt to explain why an experienced military witness would believe he saw her on base. Instead, cleanup efforts seemed to shift to Turning Point USA staff. Shortly after the podcast episode aired, TPUSA spokesperson Andrew Colvett contacted a YouTuber privately. What he sent would become one of the most controversial pieces of evidence in the entire case. It was an image of two children displayed on a phone screen, their faces partially obscured by a finger. The implication was clear. This was supposed to prove Erika was home with her kids, not anywhere near Fort Wuka. But instead of resolving doubts, the image ignited a firestorm. The alibi that didn't match the accusation. Candace Owens quickly dismantled the narrative Andrew was pushing. She pointed out something glaringly obvious yet profoundly damaging. The alibi was for the wrong date. The eyewitness account placed Erika at Fort Wuka on September 8th. Andrew's metadata and schedule, September 9th. Candace publicly accused Andrew of being intentionally evasive, writing that he clearly understood the allegation, but chose to respond with irrelevant information anyway. She questioned why he was texting a YouTuber instead of addressing her directly. And she asked the question everyone else was thinking. Why is everyone so determined to avoid discussing Fort Wuka? To critics, this wasn't confusion. It was misdirection. Live messages, real-time damage. As the YouTuber began reading Andrew's messages live, the situation grew even more uncomfortable. Andrew walked him step by step through Erika's activities on September 9th, while acting as if the Fort Wuka allegation was completely foreign to him. Listeners noticed the pattern immediately. No one had asked for an alibi for September 9th. No one had accused Erika of anything on September 9th. Yet that was the date Andrew kept returning to. To many, this mirrored other high-profile cases where authorities flooded the public with irrelevant details to bury the one detail that actually mattered. The problem with pretending ignorance. Andrew also claimed that Erika didn't even know what Fort Wuka was. That assertion was met with disbelief. Fort Wuka is not obscure. It sits within the same geographic and political ecosystem as Turning Point USA. More importantly, Erika's mother reportedly holds contracts with the Department of Defense. Familiarity with such installations would be unavoidable. The idea that Erika, CEO of a major political organization, would be unaware of a nearby military base strained credibility to the breaking point. And then came another subtle but devastating detail. The hand visible in the photo Andrew shared, the one holding the phone with the children on the screen, was clearly Erika's. That single observation reframed everything. Because it meant Andrew wasn't acting independently. He wasn't improvising. He was transmitting an alibi directly authored, or at least approved, by Erika herself. Whose kids are those? The image itself raised additional questions that no one from TPUSA has answered. Charlie's son was reportedly just 1 year old at the time, but the boy visible in the photo appeared significantly older. Viewers asked the obvious question, whose children were actually shown in the image? No explanation followed. And that silence fueled a growing suspicion that the photo wasn't just misleading. It may have been staged. This is where online commentators began using a phrase that stuck. A Fed slipping up on a script. Because mistakes happen. But getting the central date wrong, when the entire controversy hinges on that date, doesn't feel like sloppiness. It feels deliberate. Scrambling instead of confidence. If Candace Owens were truly out of her mind, pushing baseless conspiracy theories, the response would have been simple. Ignore her, dismiss her, laugh it off. That's not what happened. Instead, there was scrambling. There were mixed dates. There were indirect messages. There were questionable photos. And there were increasingly desperate attempts to redirect the conversation away from Fort Wuka. To many observers, That behavior spoke louder than any accusation. Because innocent people don't behave like this. Public perception turns. On social media, the tone shifted sharply. One user wrote that Erika had directed Andrew to release her alibi through a YouTuber, something honest people don't do. Another accused her of being at the center of a coordinated cover-up, not a grieving widow. Others went further, questioning her faith, her motives, and her emotional responses since Charlie's death. The consensus forming online was not subtle. Whatever happened, the official story was unraveling. And Fort Wuka was becoming the thread that, once pulled, threatened to unravel everything. The surgeon story that fell apart. As the Fort Wuka controversy intensified, another pillar of the official narrative began to crumble, one that had been repeated so often it was treated as unquestionable truth. It was the story about the surgeon, the so-called miracle, the bullet that never exited the body, the comparison to Superman. From the beginning, that claim carried emotional weight. It painted Charlie as almost superhuman, his body defying physics, his survival, however brief, cast as extraordinary. For supporters, it became symbolic. For critics, it felt theatrical. And for Candace Owens, it didn't add up. She said something about the story bothered her from the moment it surfaced. Not because miracles are impossible, but because the details were vague, inconsistent, and oddly self-serving. The more she revisited the claim, the more she suspected it wasn't just exaggerated, it was invented. So she started digging, tracing the origin of the miracle. Andrew Colvett had publicly claimed that a surgeon who attempted to save Charlie described the situation as a miracle, allegedly stating that the bullet did not exit the body and likening Charlie to Superman. That quote spread rapidly. It was cited by supporters. It was used to shut down skeptics. But when Candace traced the statement back to its source, she found something disturbing. The surgeon never said it. Not publicly. Not privately. Not to Andrew. Not to anyone. According to Candace, a trusted source confirmed that the surgeon did speak on the phone, but the quote attributed to him did not come from his mouth. In fact, the surgeon never compared Charlie to Superman at all. So where did the quote come from? Candace says the answer leads directly back to Erika. A phone call that changes everything. According to the source Candace trusts, Erika was on the phone during the call Andrew later referenced. The surgeon answered questions because Erika was present, but at no point did he make the statements that were later attributed to him. Instead, Candace alleges that Erika herself delivered the Superman comparison, the very words that would later be presented to the public as a surgeon's quote. When this contradiction surfaced, Erika's response was not clarification, it was deflection. She claimed Andrew went rogue. She claimed the surgeon went rogue. She accused the surgeon of violating HIPAA laws. But the source Candace relied on rejected that claim outright. No HIPAA violation occurred. No unauthorized statements were made. And no miracle quote came from the surgeon. The narrative, once again, appeared to have been manufactured, and then protected with layers of accusation meant to intimidate anyone who challenged it. Why fabricate a medical narrative? This raised an obvious and unsettling question. Why invent a story like this at all? Critics argue that the miracle narrative served a very specific purpose. It discouraged scrutiny. It shifted focus away from ballistic inconsistencies. It framed any skepticism as heartless. Who questions a miracle? But when the story collapses, it leaves behind a void filled with unanswered questions. Why hasn't the full autopsy report been released? Has it even been completed? And if it exists, what does it say about the bullet trajectory? Those questions grow louder every time another story falls apart. A widow's behavior under the microscope. At the same time these revelations surfaced, public attention turned sharply toward Erika's behavior in the months following Charlie's death. Online observers began calling her the happiest widow ever. That phrase wasn't just about appearances, it was about actions. Why, people asked, Would a grieving widow allow Turning Point USA to construct a replica of the tent where her husband died, inside a political event, so attendees could take selfies? To critics, the comparison was grotesque. They likened it to recreating the backseat of JFK's limousine and charging people to pose inside it. The idea felt less like remembrance and more like spectacle. And Erika never publicly objected. Performative grief or something else. This fed into a growing perception that something about Erika's responses felt off. Not merely composed or resilient, but detached. Candace Owens went so far as to say that Erika and the TPUSA leadership no longer even seemed human. She described them as robotic, mimicking emotion without understanding it, like actors who learned the lines but never felt the role. To supporters of Erika, those comments were cruel. To skeptics, they captured something they couldn't quite articulate, the sense that this wasn't how grief normally looks. Patterns, not isolated incidents. By this point, critics weren't looking at individual controversies anymore. They were looking at patterns. A questionable alibi tied to the wrong date. Eyewitness testimony dismissed without rebuttal. A miracle story traced back to the widow herself. HIPAA accusations used as shields. An autopsy report that no one has seen. And public behavior that felt more like brand management than mourning. Each incident alone could be explained away. Together, they painted a picture that was difficult to ignore. Faith, justice, and deferred judgment. Amid all of this, some voices urged restraint. They spoke of faith, of divine justice, of trusting that truth would surface in its own time. Candace herself acknowledged this tension. She said she rests in the belief that God is sovereign and just, and that ultimately, no human cover-up can outrun divine accountability. But that belief did not stop her from asking questions. And it did not stop others from demanding transparency. The narrative begins to collapse. By now, the public conversation had shifted decisively. This was no longer about fringe theories or online gossip. It was about why every attempt to clarify the truth seemed to generate more contradictions. If Erika were innocent, critics argued, clarity would be easy. If the story were clean, documentation would end debate. If nothing happened at Fort Wuka, a simple denial would suffice. Instead, there was silence. There was misdirection. There were stories that didn't survive scrutiny. And there was a growing belief that the truth, whatever it is, has been buried on purpose. Institutional silence, manufactured reality, and the ending no one expected. By the time all these threads were laid side by side, the story surrounding Charlie's death no longer resembled a tragic but straightforward crime. It looked engineered, managed, contained. And that realization is what pushed many observers to a far more unsettling conclusion. Whatever happened did not stop with one alleged shooter. It extended outward into organizations, spokespeople, media narratives, and institutional silence. From individual defense to institutional protection. At first, the contradictions appeared personal. Erika's alibi, Erika's statements, Erika's refusal to address specific allegations. But as scrutiny intensified, it became clear that she was not acting alone. Turning Point USA, through its spokesperson, repeatedly stepped in, not to clarify facts, but to redirect attention. Alibis were offered for dates no one questioned. Evidence was routed through unofficial channels. Messaging was fragmented, contradictory, and oddly defensive. To critics, this looked less like a public relations misstep and more like coordinated damage control. And coordination implies awareness. Why transparency never came. In cases where innocence is clear, transparency is the strongest weapon. Documents are released, timelines are clarified, accusations are dismantled with facts. That never happened here. There was no full autopsy disclosure. No comprehensive explanation of ballistic evidence. No direct response to the Fort Wuka allegation. No rebuttal to eyewitness testimony. No clarification of the surgeon narrative. Instead, There were accusations of conspiracy thinking, emotional appeals, and warnings about influencing juries. But critics pointed out the irony. Truth does not influence juries, only deception does. The FBI narrative under pressure. The official FBI account identifying Tyler Robinson as the sole shooter has faced skepticism from the start. Even people who initially accepted it began reconsidering once contradictions piled up. Candace Owens was vocal about her disbelief, but she was far from alone. Online, across political lines, people questioned how quickly the narrative was finalized and how aggressively alternative questions were discouraged. Why, they asked, did the case feel closed before it was fully opened? A widow asking for silence instead of answers. One of the most troubling aspects, in the eyes of critics, was Erika's insistence that questioning the narrative was harmful. She urged people to stop asking questions, to stop speculating, to stop digging. But that stance confused many observers, because historically, those closest to victims demand answers, not silence. They demand accountability. They demand full disclosure. They demand truth, even when it hurts. Erika appeared to demand the opposite. The tent that became a symbol. Nothing crystallized public discomfort more than the decision to recreate the tent where Charlie died and display it at a political event. For supporters, it was meant as a tribute. For critics, it crossed a line. It transformed a murder scene into a photo opportunity. It blurred the boundary between remembrance and spectacle. And it reinforced the growing perception that Charlie's death was being used as a tool, political, emotional, or otherwise. That decision alone convinced many skeptics that something was fundamentally wrong. Not human, the comment that refused to go away. Candace's remark that Erika and others involved no longer seemed human was widely criticized as harsh. But it resonated because it articulated something people were already feeling. The emotional responses felt rehearsed. The grief felt performative. The reactions felt algorithmic. It wasn't anger that unsettled people. It wasn't resilience. It was detachment. And detachment in a case like this feels cold. Public judgment hardens. As weeks passed, online sentiment shifted from curiosity to conviction. People no longer asked, "What if?" They asked, "How deep does this go?" Posts accused Erika of directing a cover-up. Others accused TPUSA of protecting assets. Some suggested federal handlers were involved. Others believed the truth was buried because it implicated too many powerful people. Whether those conclusions are accurate or not, they reflect a total collapse of public trust. And trust, once lost, is almost impossible to regain. Faith, justice, and the final reckoning. Despite everything, Candace Owens repeatedly emphasized one point. She believes in divine justice. She said she rests in the belief that no lie escapes judgment forever. That truth surfaces, even when buried under institutions, power, and fear. That belief is what keeps her asking questions. What keeps others watching closely. What keeps this story alive. Because silence does not equal closure. The ending that isn't an ending. This story does not conclude with an arrest. It does not end with a confession. It does not resolve with a press release. It ends with unanswered questions. Was Erika at Fort Wuka? Why was the wrong date defended so aggressively? Who authored the false surgeon quote? Why hasn't the autopsy been released? Why was the crime scene turned into a spectacle? And why does every attempt to clarify the truth create more confusion? For some, the answers are already clear. For others, the search has just begun. But one thing is certain. This was never just a tragedy. It was never just a shooting. And it was never just about one man. It is about power, about narrative control, about how truth can be reshaped, delayed, or buried, and about what happens when too many people decide that silence is safer than honesty. Because in the end, The most dangerous question is, who pulled the trigger? It's who made sure we stopped asking.